A lot of you have to have good creative. You have to have good production quality and values to capture the consumer. We've gone back to those days. Remember, before Facebook, before algorithmic marketing and where Facebook could just find your audience for you, creative was king.
Today, I have two incredible guests that every time I have met with them, our business has grown. And so I'm very grateful that I have the opportunity to meet with Matt Harward and Stafford Newsome. Now, if you don't know who either of these guys are, I know I've had Matt on the podcast twice in the past, and Stafford we've met with, but we've never had him on. So I'm excited to have both of these brilliant minds on. But to give you some context, if you haven't listened to those episodes, Matt is the CMO of the Messy brand. He's the CMO of MGO Global. He's built 2 9-figure brands, 6 multi-8-figure brands, done over $400 million in sales with his own brands, not like an agency side. This is his own brands. He's spent more than $60 million on Facebook ads. He's even taken his latest company public. I mean, that's like the resume of, not even the president has a resume. That's just an insane resume there. And Stafford has been involved in so much of this as the co-founder of Unicorn Industries, which is their holding company for developing tech, processes for the brands. And when we get into today, which I'm super excited about, you're gonna get a glimpse of just what that looks like. Because when you get in the minds of these two guys, they think differently than anyone that I have met in my business life. And I think you're gonna get an idea of what that process and how the gears turn and then how you can apply that to your business. So I guess with that said, guys, thank you for being here. I really appreciate both of you.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Happy to be here.
This is always fun for me to do.
Yeah. And every time we get on, it's like, you're one of the only, you're one of the guests that I have to have like a notepad here with multiple pages, Matt. Because every time we're here, I'm like, I don't want to start typing and clicking. I have to like write things down. And so
yeah, we'll have follow-up calls after this where Josh goes through and clarifies it. Like, you said this, so what does that mean? And that's always fun. It's one of the reasons, by the way, that I like coming back here, Josh, because I think it's so frustrating to talk to people and say, hey, you should try. I think that this would work really well for you. And it kind of goes in one ear and out the other. I love talking with you because I know that you're taking this stuff you're doing. And that's just a cool thing to see and participate in.
Well, thank you. We just throwing it back a little bit. The last 2 episodes we did were heavy around rapid experimentation and algorithmic scaling. Those are 2 of the top podcast downloads and on YouTube that we have had in over now a year of doing this podcast. And so the cool thing was, like, once you introduce, you're the first person to plant the seed of this idea of rapid experimentation, low threshold, high frequency. And I had never, in 9 years of business, we're now in our 10th year, I've never heard that concept, especially the way that you kind of broke into that. And that was the start of, that was like last April, I believe. I don't know if Dylan could confirm. That was like last April that we first did that, or when it released at least. So over almost a year ago, that has changed our business. Like, anyone listening, if you haven't listened to those podcasts, go back and listen to it. The idea of rapid experimentation. I kind of stole some of it, Matt, and I teach this to our coaching clients because it's so, I just couldn't not. Everybody listened to your podcast and they're like, how is he doing this? Like, what are the mechanics of this? And we've met later and I'm like, all right, well, I didn't have that much time with Matt, so we're just gonna go like trial and fail and figure this out. And we've gone down the path of doing that and it's changed our business, man. So you guys have some brilliant stuff. And today, I know we've talked briefly beforehand about this. I would love to dive into another angle of marketing world that is just rapidly growing right now, and that is AI. ChatGPT is one of the hot topics. You guys have done a lot more than I have in any capacity. My capacity of ChatGPT, just to set the stage real fast, is I go in there and I say, write me 25 Facebook ad headlines for this product under 50 characters, and I put the link to the product page, and it'll spit out 25 headlines that are a good start. I don't know if that's the best way to do it. It sounds like a pretty amateur beginner phase 1 way to do it. But I would love to start with maybe How are you guys, and maybe this is really broad, but how are you guys leveraging AI in what you do?
So when we started Unicorn, gosh, what was that? 2 years ago?
2 years ago, yeah.
Lord, that's crazy, right?
Actually, like this week, so happy
It was
anniversary.
February. It was February
Yeah.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
And the concept there was, so I had my other company, Harvard Media. That was our holding company for 4 of our brands, 3 of which were 8-figure brands. And one of the challenges that we had was incubating and spinning up new brands and really covering a lot of ground in testing. Now, my background is actually tech. That's kind of an important part of this story, because this is not one of those stories where there's a lot of marketers that are now suddenly experts in AI, that they became experts in the last 4 weeks since ChatGPT came out. And I don't want to, by the way, crap on those people, because I think that they're discovering cool new things. But important in this is my background is tech. My background is algorithmic tech. It's why I several years, 5-6 years ago, whatever it was, 8 years ago. Gosh, time goes fast. I really started leaning into algorithmic marketing with Facebook, and I was a CTO at the time, not a CMO. But what we realized was we needed to have a method to cover a lot of ground really fast, and try and find, from a product standpoint, from a brand standpoint, where are the outliers? Where are the things that we can pursue, and we don't have to put a whole bunch of money into product development, into sourcing a product, into waiting for it to get here before we figure out what we can do with it. And so we started coming up with some strategies around that. We have a third partner, Charlie, in Unicorn. Me and Ford and Charlie all worked at Harvard Media at the time, and I was the CMO there. And then we split off to create Unicorn, and it was specifically to push into this idea that creating surface area, creating rapid movement, lowering the threshold, which Josh, you already mentioned that earlier, and we can talk about that more if we want, a refresh, of course, but lowering the threshold, really upping the frequency of how fast we move, that was a dimension we wanted to explore in marketing. So we split off and we created Unicorn, and we started looking at AI back then. So we've been doing this AI portion. I was mildly involved in it before that, but we were getting heavy into AI with Unicorn 2 years ago. And it was admittedly, it was more automation heavy than AI heavy, because AI wasn't at the point then that it is now. But then we kind of just nailed the timing on it. Honestly, we got very fortunate that in October, November of 2021, OpenAI released GPT-3. And that was the first time where, and Ford, you probably remember these calls. I called you up and it's like, dude, we hit the freaking jackpot here, and really getting deep into that. And then over the last year and a half since then, there's just been so much growth in that area. And even our vision has changed, because we've now realized that, partly due to ATT, what Apple did to creating this kind of adpocalypse, if you will, right now, and this cold winter of DTC marketing and digital marketing, partly because of that, partly because this is just where things are going. We ended up in a position where we really lean more into AI, and I believe that we're also kind of, I think that digital marketing is going to turn hard this way anyway, not just in the tools that we as marketers have available to us, but I think in the direction that the platforms themselves are going to go. You see Google kind of making this push with Performance Max, with PMax. They haven't got it right yet, and there's issues there, but PMax is a turn hard into what we're doing. I think Facebook, this is my prediction, I don't have any inside knowledge on this, but I believe Facebook in this calendar year is also going to turn hard into this direction that will favor a lot of coverage, that will favor a lot of what we call splintering, and diversity of content, and surface area. Again, surface area, if we want to talk about that, is a critical part of how machine learning works, not necessarily AI, but machine learning. And so anyway, that's kind of the story of how we brought all this together. Was it started 2 years ago with an emphasis on automation, but a curiosity towards AI. And it's really kind of shifted now to where it's more an emphasis on AI and a curiosity towards automation and how we can use and leverage the automation back into AI instead of the other way around. And that kind of leads us to where we are today. I'm sure it will morph a lot. We're still very, very much in motion. We are discovering stuff every day that, for how we can either accelerate our frequency or not raise our threshold, because we don't want to raise the threshold from a standpoint of the human inputs involved, but raise the output, raise the quality of the output and what we're doing with it.
If we could just as like a really brief recap, if you could just explain to everyone when you say low threshold, high frequency, could you explain that? Just summarize that for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Because this is critical to what we do. Here's what we found. I wish I had my little drawing thing that I could do. In marketing specifically, but in general business and other things that we do in life, you've usually got two competing forces at play. And one of them is what we call threshold. Another word for it might be effort. And so generally the higher the effort that you've got to do, the lower the speed at which you can do it. So think video production. If you wanted to have a really high quality video production in your ad, then that's going to take time and effort to get there. And you're just not going to be able to spit out a lot of variations of that you won't have a lot of opportunities to do that. The problem is that, especially with ATT, a lot of you have to have good creative. You have to have good production quality and values to capture the consumer. We've gone back to those days. Remember, before Facebook, before algorithmic marketing and where Facebook could just find your audience for you, creative was king. So the goal here still is good creative. The problem is most companies aren't ready for good creative. Most companies, the threshold is so high, they're going to get few enough swings at that and they're going to be wrong. They're going to put out a long form landing page with great graphics, and it's going to be beautiful. It's going to be gorgeous, and it's going to suck because they missed the messaging. They missed on what's important to the consumers. They missed on sequencing. There's just all kinds of ways to experience failure there. And I would say if you're a marketer listening to this, you probably experienced some amount of this or some amount of, like I would love to be able to go pay Russ Brunson $100,000 to write a sales letter for me and go pay Chamber Media to create this really nice video for me. The problem is right now, if I paid that let's say in a startup, I'm going to pay them to do the wrong thing. Almost certainly. I would just be crossing my fingers that it would be anything other than that. And so at one end of the spectrum is this high threshold, high effort, but very low frequency processes that usually what creates the low frequency and the high effort is you have to get people involved. Creative work is it's a humanistic work by its very nature. Now, at the very far end of the other side of it, you have the possibility for super high frequency and very low threshold, meaning take people out of the equation and it's just pure automation. Before AI came around, you couldn't really leverage it as much as we wanted to. But now here's kind of how I view this is Facebook's algorithm. If we talk about Facebook advertising or Google's algorithm, it doesn't really matter. Are these super high speed algorithms that can consume they're voracious in their consumption of content and what they can do and how fast they can do it. And then they kind of, so it's flying along at light speed. And then it meets most businesses that are just stumbling along at this really slow plodding speed. Most businesses, even when they're moving, they think they're moving fast, but you can't, you as a human, you cannot move at the speed of an algorithm. You cannot move at the speed of a computer. And so our thought 2 years ago, which is now even more powerful because we've got AI on our side heavily, but it was, well, what if we had processes that basically I could match Facebook's algorithm with my own algorithm that I could throw out instead of in a good week getting say 25 creative tests in? What if in a good week I could get 500 creative tests in, and really accelerate that? So again, lowering the threshold, which means the quality of these tests they're what I would call low-fi tests, low fidelity tests. They're not gorgeous creative. They're not beautiful videos. Where we do creative and where we do video, they're very basic. But what we're testing on is, what do consumers care about? Here's what I know is that beautiful video can't save a crap message. There's no salvation in that. Mm-hmm. Now, when you take a powerful message, when you take something that consumer cares about and add great creative to it, that's a really powerful combination. But creative without the right message, creative in the wrong sequence, creative, like I said, there's a lot of ways that high threshold work can go bad. We're trying to take the guesswork out of it, prove the concepts, what we call proof-oriented marketing, and graduate things up till they earn high threshold, low frequency effort put into them. So we'll usually graduate things up, and our strength is not in that creative side. So in our case, we'll graduate things up, and then we actually hire an agency to do what they're good at, which is usually the creative side of it. It's not typically discovery. It's not typically creating surface area. It's not typically having literally hundreds of variations and splinters out there. So that's kind
our
of
agencies love us because we show up to them and we say, hey, we figured out all the stuff that you stress about, and we just want you to work on this, optimize on this.
Yeah. Just go do your thing. Go make a good video. And here's what we know. Here are not only the points, here's the order of operations here, here's all this stuff. Now turbocharge it. In fact, that's what good creative is a turbocharger. And if you've got bad messaging, good creative is just going to turbocharge that. You're just going to lose money faster. Good creative turbocharges good messaging. Good creative turbocharges sequencing, telling the story in the right order. Good creative accentuates story. Does that kind of make sense? And so we still want to get to that point. It's just that most people, in my experience, way underestimate the effort and the work that should go in prior to good creative. And the reason they do that, by the way, is because generally they think, I've got this really good idea, and it's obvious and evident to me what the right message is. Mm-hmm. And it's shocking. And hopefully you could back this up, Josh, as the owner of an agency. It's shocking how often what's obvious and evident is not what works. Is not if that were the case, way more businesses would be successful, because most businesses say, I got this idea. I think this is a good product. I think this is a good idea. And if I build this and do this, then surely people will show up and buy it. And then the first time that you get punched in the mouth is when you realize, holy crap, they're not just showing up and buying this. There's a lot of effort I now have to put in to get people to actually buy this thing, to tell the right story, to get to a compelling first message, to get to a compelling offer, to get to a compelling price point. I mean, all of these things come into it that I wish it were just good, smart people could do the obvious thing and business would work. Actually, I don't wish that, because then I wouldn't be unique anymore. But good, smart people show up with good, solid ideas all the time, and they don't work. They're hard to sell. So this is just really, if you had to take a high threshold, low frequency approach to that, it's just going to it takes so long. And you don't get enough swings at it. You'll go out of business before you get the number of touches in that you need to. And so this is, that's the high low threshold and the high low frequency. They're almost always in opposition to each other. If you want high frequency, if you want to move fast, you generally have to lower your threshold. If you want to go far, if you want to have something that really scales, you generally need to raise your threshold, but your frequency is going to go way down. And so it's not even finding the combination, because this is a continuum. It's applying the right strategy at the right time and graduating it up through. There's a threshold that used to be, and again, you can shut me up at any time here, but if you had kind of this continuum from super high frequency and super low threshold to super low frequency and super high threshold, it used to be, because Facebook was so good, you only had to go about 40% of the way in that. And then you just kind of hand it over to Facebook and say, hey, do the rest for me, do the heavy lifting for me. And that's when we started this process. You could still do that. And that's really what we were trying to lean into that. Well, things since morphed on, not just on Facebook, but on any algorithmic platform that's on mobile. And now you've got to go like 60 or 70, maybe 80% of the way there before you can ask the platforms to do the heavy lifting for you again, because they've lost so much visibility into the audience and the customer, or they can't use the visibility that they have. So now we've got to do the heavy lifting on that front end part. And it just so happens, and again, honestly, this was more just good timing and good luck than anything else. But it just so happens that the processes we started working on 2 years ago to figure out how we could more quickly incubate products is a really ideal solution to getting up to that 60, 70, 80% on Facebook, on Google, on, even on Amazon and TikTok and so on. Again, anything that's algorithmically driven, these processes will work, because you're basically matching their algorithm with your algorithm and getting that speed out of it. And other limitations come in. I want to be clear on that, but that's kind of the goal here. Sorry, very long explanation for you.
No, this is good. And here's what I would say. Anyone who's listening to this and they're like, okay, this is starting to click, like this makes sense. It's better to do these rather than, like, some people call spaghetti testing, right? Where you just take it and you just lob the spaghetti or whatever. You're trying to nail jelly to a tree, whatever another analogy you want to use. But it's kind of like you're using your gut versus trusting the actual data of it. And I want to give, if you want to dive really deep into this, episode 19 and episode 20 of the Ecommerce Alley podcast, go listen to those. 2 of the most downloaded podcasts on algorithmic scaling, rapid experimentation. Matt has spent tens of millions of dollars on Facebook ads, more than I. But what I do want to do is I want just to give kind of a live testament to this process, the idea of getting your reps in before going to the Super Bowl that's really the concept here. And you said something that stuck with me. This stuck with me. I'm not a golfer. Matt's a golfer. He lives in Phoenix. I think Phoenix or Arizona in the Valley. So everyone golfs there. You have to golf to live there pretty much in Scottsdale, that whole area. And he used an analogy that stuck with me. And he said, if you were waiting to get good, meaning like if you're going to go launch your ads and do like this high threshold work, all this resource you have to put into like a high creative, like you were mentioning, if you were waiting to get good when you were on the green, you'd have really like 18 shots to get good. But if you were to have the green in your office and you're to have your putter with you and you're to focus several hundred times a day on your stance and your grip and whatever else golf stuff you have to work on, because I'm not a golfer, then when you're on the green, you have these reps in, you have these small incremental, let's use the experiments in as you're doing that when you go to the green, you're much better, because people don't just go to the green and get good. It's what happens when they do it behind the scenes. And that's something that story and that analogy, I'm like, oh, it just clicked. It makes so much sense. I don't golf, but if I'm gonna take my ads and move these into like conversion campaigns and try to really get them to scale with Facebook ads, I need to, while Facebook used to do the heavy lifting, I need to go further in the distance. I need to get the reps in, do all these experiments, validate a lot of things along the way instead of just diving in. And I'm gonna give some tangible numbers just from my standpoint. I don't spend the kind of dollars you do on your brands. We're not, I'm still in my journey here. But when we first met, Matt, I think I was spending, and this is small chump change compared to what you guys have spent, we were spending like maybe $100 to $200 a day on Facebook ads. That's what kind of like we were spending on Facebook ads. We just came off the last 2 weeks spending $3,000 a day on Facebook ads in our ad spend. And I share that only because like I've never done that before. Never mind. I've always heard.
Let me take your analogy just a little bit further. You're spending $3,000 a day and you're in the golf simulator or in the office hitting golf balls and getting your reps in and all that stuff. So Charlie, our other partner, he and I were talking 2 days ago, and he golfs probably more than Matt does. And he was heading up to the simulator, and I was like, hey man, are you still golfing a ton? He's like, well, I went in and I was doing 3 buckets a day at the golf simulator. He's like, I've destroyed my shoulders, I've destroyed my arms, and he's got great form and everything. He's like, there's a limit to how much I can swing that golf ball. And he's like, and so I asked him, what are you doing now? He's like, well, now I have to take he's got a TrackMan and it's recording everything. He's like, now I can't just go in and I can't swing the golf balls because I'm going to destroy my body. I have to look at the data. And he's going into his charts and he's showing me all these different breakdowns of what he's doing. He's like, now when I go back, I have to be intentional about how I'm doing this because I only have, as a human, I've got 3 baskets full before I start breaking down as my body and all that stuff. So you're running $3,000 a day, super impressive. It's great because you're getting your reps in, and you could very closely be hitting the threshold to where your human manpower of doing that is maxed out, and you're going to have to look at something like AI, like what Matt's talking about. So Charlie had that breakdown where he met his human capacity, and now he has to lean on some technology and some automation and some AI to tell him how he can go further and how he can
go to the next
his
level
time better.
I love that. Just brought this whole story that I had from April of 2022 to a whole new level. I love that. I'm just going to stack that layer on next time I tell this story. Which, by the way, I do credit Matt with that example every single time. I'm like, a brilliant marketing, Matt Harvard once told me this, and it made so much sense. I love that, Stafford. So let's kind of dive into that then. So the idea of low threshold, meaning we're not spending a crazy amount of time testing thing or crazy amount of time just throwing it in, hoping for the best.
And labor, correct?
Yes. And we're trying to get high frequency or like volume and reps, on that standpoint. How does, like you just said, you only have so much human power behind it. How does AI come into the picture that you guys have seen? And maybe how are you using it from a high level?
You want to take the implementation of this, or you want me to talk about
hit the big picture really quick, and then I'll tell people how we're actually implementing it.
Okay, so here's what's important to understand about how algorithms work in general, and let's just focus in on the Facebook algorithm. All right, this is the one that most marketers are at some level playing on Facebook, and it's got subtleties between how it and Google's going to work, or YouTube, or whatever else. But conceptually, let's just there's going to be some common things there. So I think I mentioned on one of our past episodes, machine learning in general likes a couple of things. It likes surface area. It likes a lot of options to choose from and pick from. So I call that surface area. So think of it as just, it's a big field of all the options that there are out there. And it likes contrast. So we as marketers so often are accustomed to split testing, do an A/B split test and trying to figure out, well, is the word beautiful better, or pretty, or gorgeous, or what? We come up with these little variations in things, and that's actually not a good fit for how today's algorithms work. You're better off having high contrast, but high contrast now suddenly for humans, now it's like, I got to think of different ideas. Now all of a sudden we're raising the threshold, and it makes it hard to do that. So setting the table for what we're doing with AI right now is, we know that the algorithm wants a lot of surface area, meaning it wants us to test boundaries. It wants us to test an idea way out here out in left field, way out here out in right field. And it wants us to test ideas way back there and way up there. And not that all of them work, it's just that we want to feed that, not just feed that algorithm, we want to lean into that propensity, that need for machine learning to want to have a lot of diversity, a lot of contrast, and a lot of surface area. So does that make sense, Josh? I'm trying to not make these super technical, but that's a good way of looking at it. We want to present a broad area. And by the way, there's a second side to this, and this is where the high threshold and low frequency comes into place, because most businesses can't, if you think of this in terms of land area. Think of it in terms of the United States. All right. We want to give machine learning as much of a view of all the audiences and all the diversity that exists in the United States. But we also want to defend as small a border as possible when it comes time. When you scale, it's about picking a section of this and saying, I'm going to defend the heck out of this portion, meaning I'm going to put all my resources into it and I'm going to dominate in this area. It's a mistake to say, I'm going to dominate and defend the entirety of the United States. Most businesses just don't have the resources to do that. So part of what we're doing here in this discovery is not only finding what are the things that the algorithm loves, it's what are the things that we feel like if we chose to, that we could really go deep defending. And this is scale. So I'm going to say defending, but scale is about picking one of these things that tripped the algorithm. That's where the algorithm said, I love this. I will give you distribution on this all day long. I will give you cheap clicks on this all day long. I will feed this audience all day long. I love whatever you're doing here. And now we just go deep and deep and deep because we want to defend. We want to discover a large area and defend a small area and scale into those narrow things. But now again, what we're trying to do is find the areas that when we scale into them, we have a disproportionate likelihood of success. We have a saying here that is basically we're always trying to scale the tail and relentlessly chasing the tail. And the tail to us is those things that they're hard to find. They're oftentimes, I wouldn't say they're illogical because that's the wrong way of saying, but let's just say they're not the obvious things that scale. The obvious things generally are overplayed. Everybody's tried to scale the obvious things. So it's finding these little pockets that are statistical outliers, true outliers, by the way, meaning they perform it's not that they perform 10% better than this other thing or 20% better than this other thing. They're often performing 400 and 500% better. So 4 and 5x what this other thing will perform. And now that we find those are the things that go to the high threshold, low frequency, and graduate up. So, okay, so does that make sense? Big picture, what we're trying to do here?
It does. I have 2 follow-up questions to that, though. So, like, how do you know that there is a tail to scale? Like, how do you know when the tail is, you're like, this is the tail to scale, and then once you begin that process, do you move to high threshold stuff before you really scale? Or do you continue scaling with that some low threshold items?
So here's the thing. Oh, sorry, go for it. You want to take
I don't know if this is the right answer, but if you think about the tail, what Matt's talking about is, if you go back to high school math, we're talking about a bell curve like that, okay? And so part of this is, how do we know when we have a tail and what we're trying to scale? Yes. It has to do with the reps that you're getting into the data set. That's part of the key to this. You can't take a sample size of 10 or 20. Well, you can take a sample size of 10 and 20 and say, here's the tail, but it's likely that's not the tail. You're looking at sample sizes in the hundreds. You're looking at the sample sizes in the 300, 400, 500. We're running, 500 tests a week doing this, because as we see that, we can start modeling what a tail looks like, and you'll start seeing those outliers that people are not particularly looking at. So one example that I did with a recent partner is we took all of their current messaging that they're actually running full production on before we came in. I threw them into an automated set of message tests. And then I went and I leveraged AI, and I had to start exploring questions. I started prompting it to do questions across, different types of pain points, different viewpoints, different lifestyles, and having it crank out, 30, 40, 50, 60 variations of those at a time. And then my threshold was to scan it and say, those look reasonable, and they're not going to get me booted off of Facebook because it's not, blatantly incorrect.
Can I jump in here real fast, Ford?
Yeah.
Because this is, by the way, what Ford just mentioned is actually probably a way I need to change how I define the high threshold and low threshold, because at that low threshold side of things, here's what I tell people all the time. And what I tell Ford all the time is, because when we first started this, we didn't know like how low a threshold should we go. And over the last 2 years, what I've found is on that low threshold side, on the side where Ford's throwing a lot of stuff at it. It just can't be an actively bad idea, right? And most people are trying to come up with what's a good idea. We're trying to just don't make it actively bad. Don't make it porn. Don't make it, swear words. It can't be actively bad. It can't be something that's going to get us kicked off of Facebook. It can't be something that's it can't be that. On the other side, it must be actively good, right? And actively good, when you sit around and you put that pressure on you to, what's a good idea? First of all, you're probably wrong. What you think is a good idea isn't a good idea. And how you'll know that is go spend money on it. It's not going to work statistically, right? And so on that side, it's just what's not actively bad. And if it's not actively bad, let's test it and let's see. And most people can't do that because they can't generate enough ideas to make that reasonable. And so now, when Ford uses that word reasonable, that's reasonable. That's code for that's a word that has specific meaning to us. Reasonable means it's not actively bad. It's not actively stupid, and anything other than that.
So if you're looking at the bar to entry, guys, that is as far down. That is as far down close to the floor as you can go. Is active.
And we're not trying to be right, by the way. We do not sit around and think we do sit around and think what would be a good idea to test. Because that's, of course we do that. But we expand out, and this is a big part of where we've started to use AI extensively, is how can we take our limited, what we see might be pain points, what we see as might be aspirational things, what we see as might be who our audience is, what they're looking for, and so on, and dramatically expand our field of view and our field of vision. And so, Ford, do you mind talking about that? So now Ford's the implementer of this. So I want to be clear about it. So Ford's the guy who day to day is up to his eyeballs every day in this AI. How would we take from a low threshold idea, how might you use AI to then create surface area, generate surface area, and kind of get into what we call splinter. So, sorry, I'm going to use another term here that it's important to understand. So I just mentioned A/B testing is usually let's replace this word with this word. Let's make these small changes and only change one variable at a time. And that's great in some areas. It's not a good fit for machine learning and AI. And so we have this concept called splinters. And splinters are think of it more like kind of branches of a tree, where we're going to make bigger jumps at things that are all going to be in the same general direction, in the same dimension, but we actually want to really push on, we want a lot of diversity there. We want a lot of different voices there. We want a lot of different viewpoints, a lot of different perspectives, even though it might all be around, let's say, what would be a good topic to hit on? Let's say people are talking about, let's say that we're addressing marketers and we're talking to marketers. And so we want to talk to them about how to run effective Facebook ads or something like that. We could now go through and splinter this out in so many different ways. So now, Ford, I want to hand it off to you. What would you go through to splinter out a message like that? Or I don't know, should we take a specific one that we actually do? Is that too revealing if we talk about, say, vitamin C?
Okay. So with vitamin C, that's an interesting one. Because
by the way, Josh, are you okay if we jump down into this?
We are. I'll just add my thought on splintering. I like how we've coined the term internally is just theming, where we just take these buckets and we have tons of different, I guess you could call it, maybe it's wrong, splinters of like themes of different elements. So like we could take, we have pain points of this potential product. We could hone in on one pain point and have a boatload of tests within that to validate different things and have the diversity within those messaging tests. I don't know if that's on the same page, but maybe not.
It is. It's the same concept, and you're looking for variety and you're looking for diversity. And I cannot overemphasize how important diversity is when you're trying to feed a machine learning algorithms. So now, knowing that, Josh, I'm about to make you a lot more money. Ford's about to actually this time. So yeah, Ford, and I've got some specific ideas in mind that this is unrehearsed, so you may not hit on these things, but Ford, explain what you would do, and I may come in and chime in with some other stuff too.
Next week on the Ecommerce Alley podcast.
Everybody's trying to force the old way of doing things in Facebook to still work. And I believe we're going to have a breaking change, worse than ATT, where it's not going to be a breaking change, it's going to be a breaking pivot to embracing a lot of content, embracing a lot of viewpoints, embracing coverage, embracing contrast, and embracing diversity of content, and letting Facebook piece together the touch points, or Google piece together the touch points in the conversion path in a better way than you can with a long form sales copy, where you assume you know the sequence, and you assume that you know the content, and you assume that you know what people want to see and when they want to see it and how they want to see it. Now it's going to be, how can I take this one piece of content? How can I take this one testimonial from a customer and present it in 8 or 9 or 10 different modalities, and then give it to Facebook and say, do with this what you will. Give it to PMax and say, do with this what you will. Find the spot in this conversion process, find the touch point where this is the thing that they need to see, because I've got this. And then later, when they have a concern and they've got an obstacle, here's another touch point that just addresses that, and it comes from this viewpoint, and it's in this, it's video, or it's text, or it's a quiz, or whatever it might be. And that explosion of content, that explosion of diversity, that explosion of modalities, I believe is the future of online marketing.